The Asterix series of comic albums is pretty much familiar to anyone who was ever a child. I grew up reading these hardback volumes, bande dessinée, from my local library. I've owned very few of them, but the quality generally is kept up throughout the series with, one or two exceptions. It's a huge deal. Asterix has its own theme park, Park Asterix, which looks a bit shonk, but whatever. And yes, it's a huge multimedia franchise, so that means there are plenty of video games. And I thought I'd cover everything released on, basically your known sort of home consoles and handhelds. So Game Boy, Game Gear, SNES, NES, Mega Drive, Master System. Pretty much it. That's ignoring the arcade game, which is fine, but it's something you can never play at home. It was never ported to a home system as far as I know, so I didn't include it. Sorry if you were expecting to see that. Yeah, here's my review. It's okay. It's a bit of a coin muncher, but nonetheless, here's a look at the Asterix games released for said home systems between the sort of 8 and 16-bit eras. The first game I'm going to cover is Asterix for the Sega Master System from 1991, and that is just called Asterix. Now, this one often kind of gets flagged up as one of the better Master System games, and it's pretty good. It is pretty good for what it is. It's very similar in feel to Castle of Illusion, which is one of the best games on the Master System, if not the best. But to me personally, it's just a little bit lacking. It's a little bit fundamentally dull. And I like everything. You know me, I pretty much like everything. But I find this game a little bit rote and slow. There's a lot of situations where you just kind of have to, there'll be like a wall you've got to break through, but you can only break through it like 2 blocks at a time with Obelix. Yeah, you can play as both Asterix and Obelix, but they're pretty similar. Again, it's not bad. It would be really foolish to call it bad, but I just don't see what makes it so great. It's just okay. It's a little bit flat. It's a little bit rote. I will credit that it is quite long, which is good. I mean, I say it's quite long. If you know what you're doing, you can beat the whole thing in about an hour. But for a Master System platformer, that is actually quite a significant amount of time. But no, you're sort of left to right, jump and punch. The punch move is so short range that it almost feels useless. You've got your kind of Mickey Mouse butt bounce, except Asterix will jump and punch downwards, which makes, I guess, more sense. And he can drop explosives that are like canisters of the magic potion, I guess. I don't really know what they're supposed to be. It all looks perfectly nice, and if you play it, you'll probably have a pretty good time. It's just, to me, it's not top tier Master System, Also imaginatively titled Asterix, the next game is, Asterix for the Game Boy, released in 1993, so a 2-year jump there, 2 years of no Asterix for anyone. And it is excellent. It is an extremely enjoyable Game Boy game, and honestly, one of my favourite Game Boy games. I don't know if that makes me basic or whatever, but it exemplifies everything I want to see in a Game Boy game. See, most people would stop the recording and do over when they made an involuntary sort of gastric sound. but not me. That's the difference. That's what you're getting with Stuart Jipp. I don't give a shit. Basically, what it has is it has that minimal look to it, where everything's just what it needs to be. It very much reminds me of the original Super Mario Land or the excellent Sunsoft Batman game, where everything's just good enough. And that sounds like damning it with faint praise, but it's not, because when I play a Game Boy game, I don't want like super detailed cartoon graphics, because they blur all over the place. This game doesn't blur it, and everything's just really obvious. It's just like, okay, here's your platforms, here's your holes, here's your spikes, collect the stars. When a key appears, collect that for a bonus round. It's all very plain and simple and playable. The level design is good. It gets challenging quite quickly, and it's just a fun little platform game. And it's like probably top 10 Game Boy for me. I had a really good time with this one whenever I pick it up. It's exactly what I want to play on that kind of system. Asterix, again, very well-named game there for the NES in 1993. Same year as Game Boy, probably released on the same day, I haven't checked. Is at first glance extremely similar to the Game Boy game. It has very similar enemies, very similar kind of mechanics, but it's not identical. The levels aren't quite the same. And to be honest, it doesn't feel quite as good on the NES as it does on the Game Boy. But that's not to say it's bad. It's perfectly playable. It's just a game that stood out on the Game Boy as being a nice kind of simple thing. Almost seems a little bit too simple on the NES. We're used to higher tier platforms like Super Mario Brothers, 2 and 3, and sort of exploration platforms like Battle of Olympus. But Asterix is okay. There's nothing to really to dislike about it. It's just a little bit slow, a little bit unimaginative, and surprisingly quite hard to emulate, because I don't think it ever came out in the States, so there's only European ROMs. But you shouldn't ever use emulation. It's against the law. Obviously, you should buy copies, like I definitely did. And so we come to the end of the games released in 1993 that are just called Asterix trilogy, with Asterix on the SNES in 1993. And once again, it is a fairly simple platformer, though I rate this one above the SNES game. Bollocks. I obviously meant the NES game, and now now that's something I really should re-record. But I don't want to. Ladies and gentlemen. So we're just going to have to put up with this kind of waffle, because, all the popular people would re-record it, but not me. Maybe that's why. Maybe someday I'll learn. But not today. Anyway, Asterix on the SNES. Yes, I favour this over the NES version, because it's just that little bit more interesting in its level design. It's got all sort of new levels. It's not a sort of halfway house of the Game Boy version, though it does again retain some elements of that one. There are more sort of secrets, things to find. It's a little bit more challenging than any of the other versions as well, and it all looks very nice and simple, in a way that does actually work for a Super Nintendo game. It's not too busy. It's nice and clean, a bit like, Super Mario World. The music's a bit shite, but to be honest, I've come to expect that from the Super Nintendo. Don't get upset. Obviously, there's some phenomenal music on the Super Nintendo, but for me, as a rule, not so good SNES music is awful, because I just don't like the sampled kind of synths or whatever they use on that system. I'm not really a technical guy, so I don't know how to describe it, but I've never been a fan. Yeah, Asterix on the Super Nintendo. It's pretty good fun, pretty good game. Nothing to write home about, but you're not gonna completely hate it. There's nothing to hate about it, and that's always good. Released in 1993 again for the Sega Master System, Asterix and the Secret Mission is pretty much a direct sequel to the original Master System Asterix. It's very, very similar in its gameplay and its visuals. The colours are a little bit more kind of brighter and more saturated, and it's not as good as the original, which I didn't love in the first place. It's just okay again. For some reason, the punch move, which was useless in the first game, has been made kind of more annoying and useless by the fact that it now has a kind of maybe second-long wind-up before you even throw the punch, which is just an unusual decision. I'm not sure why they thought that would work. I mean, it's pretty forgiving, but it doesn't feel good. The conveyance isn't really there. The level design, it's very flat all the way through the game. It's very, very flat sort of stuff, I find. You go to kind of into a sort of a pirate ship-ish stage, like a haunted stage. You'll go to all the sort of Asterix kind of archetypes, but none of it's that thrilling. There's no sort of screen that kind of makes you go, oh, I wonder how I'm going to solve this. It's all very obvious the whole way through, and again, not really a bad game. It's an okay game. It's kind of plagued by slowdown because I feel like they got sort of eyes bigger than their stomach with the graphics in a way. It's like you'll get sort of multiple enemies on the screen, and you'll get like a rain effect or a snow effect going on, and it just makes the game kind of chug. Yeah, it's not great, but you'll come to realise that with Asterix, there really aren't that many games that just plain suck. It's quite it's a franchise that's quite sort of adaptable to video games. But yeah, not great. There's also sections in this game where it feels like it was designed to annoy you, which is never fun. There's a bit in particular where you're traversing kind of snowy platforms with a very low kind of ceiling, so if you jump too high you end up on a raised platform above you and you have to go all the way back around again to attempt the same jump. I mean, I guess you don't die at least, but it's almost more annoying to have to loop something without dying, because that's not really a true fail state, it's just you annoyingly having died. Or not died. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. The game is just that boring that I couldn't think about it for too long before I just trail off. Oh dear. Asterix and the Secret Mission. Yeah, I wouldn't really bother with this one unless you're desperate. Asterix and the Secret Mission was also released on the Game Gear in '93, and I just want to quickly kind of shout that out because it's still not a great game, but for some reason on the Game Gear, where everything's just that little bit more compact, it kind of works for me a little more. Maybe it's because the Game Gear doesn't have quite so many good platformers as the Master System, but this one feels like a little bit more suited to the Game Gear. It doesn't seem to slow down as much, which is nice, and the graphics are just that little bit sort of more muted, which works well with the Game Gear's backlight. So this is actually not that bad of a pickup for your Game Gear. It's more recommended than picking up the Master System, where you're kind of spoilt for platformers. But no, this one's worth getting for your Sega handheld if you fancy it. Asterix and the Great Rescue, released for the Mega Drive in, again, 1993, the year of Asterix, is a bit of a departure from everything we've seen so far, because rather than being a sort of basic platformer, it's a bit more of a puzzle-solvey kind of platformer. It's got a very appealing, in my opinion, clean look to it. Asterix himself looks a bit odd, like but maybe I'm just used to the weird kind of small sprites from the previous games. It's a very attractive game in my opinion. The use of colour is so, I don't know if striking is the right word, but it all just seems kind of chill. It's based around finding a route through each level with the use of like items and manipulating the environment in fairly basic kind of ways, but it works. It's fun. It's just simply fun to play. It looks nice as well all the time, as I said, but not just in the kind of the colourful sense. It's just very clean and characterful, and it's very obvious what is and isn't a platformer. Sorry, what isn't a platform, which is crucial in games like this, and you'd think would be more common, but it's not. It's a little bit all over the place, where you'll go from, say, a Roman outpost seeming stage to a underwater stage. If I can fault anything in the game, it's the fact that the time limits are a touch strict, but it kind of works, because it is the kind of game where you are supposed to figure out what you need to do quickly. The problem is, losing by running out of time in a game like this is pretty much never ever fun. I feel personally like the challenge of actually figuring out what to do should be the major challenge. Figuring out what to do while also avoiding running out of time it feels a bit like a difficulty crutch, where it's not enough to be smart, you also have to be fast. Which sounds like, I don't know, maybe that does sound a bit silly, but it's difficult to get across exactly what I mean. I don't feel like the time limit really adds much to this game. It's not the longest game, it's only about an hour long, and that's if you know exactly how to solve all the puzzles, I suppose. But I think it would be a better experience, less stressful, if there wasn't the constant looming time limit threat, because it just kind of means like, okay, I figured out how to solve this puzzle, but unfortunately I figured it out 10 seconds after I really needed to, so I'm going to have to repeat this stage, because there's no way I can make it to the exit in time now. That's not a great feeling, but nonetheless, I do think this is a good game, and I think that people should definitely give it a look if they haven't already. The Master System version of Asterix and the Great Rescue, also from '93, is a little bit different to the Mega Drive one. It's fundamentally quite similar in the way that the gameplay sort of plays out, but there's more of a focus on hidden secrets. The time limit is gone, so you don't have to worry about that, which is nice. You can switch between Asterix and Obelix at any time to solve certain puzzles, and now, the interesting thing about this one is, the risk of tooting my own horn, even though nobody cares about this, so I'm really not. I'm pretty versed in 8-bit, and 16-bit platformers, and I really hadn't put any sort of time or attention into this game, but I think it's up there with the top-tier Master System platform games, which is not something I would say sort of too lightly. It's remarkable visually. It really does look like a kind of early Mega Drive game. I'm really impressed by the graphics, and the level design starts off interesting and just kind of gets progressively more complex. It isn't perfect, because the attacks, the punch move, the combat in general is just so meh, whatever. It's just, you have such a small range for your attacks that it's just almost tiresome whenever it comes up, so I guess in that respect it would be impossible to call it truly top tier, but I had a lot of fun with this, and I think it has a lot to offer. It's in that zone that I really enjoy, where there's a reason to really look around and inspect things. It has those kind of secrets I love, where there'll just be something hidden in a normal wall for no real reason. I love stuff like that. The levels share some elements with the Mega Drive version, but none of the designs are the same. It's all new levels, and better levels as far as I'm concerned. It's really good stuff. Great Rescue also came to the Game Gear, also in 1993, which really was the year of Asterix on this evidence. It plays super well on the handheld. The only problem is it's super zoomed in, as you'd expect, but that's not really a huge problem with Great Rescue, because it's a pretty slow-paced game. The levels seem to have been slightly redesigned to account for the change in kind of screen estate as well, but I'd say while it's not as good as the Master System title, it's still a really, really good game, and one of the better Game Gear games, because I hate to say it, that machine really didn't have that many absolute bangers. But no, this is good stuff, and I'd recommend it to anyone pretty much who has a Game Gear. 1994 gave us Asterix and the Power of the Gods on the Mega Drive. A really unusual little game. It looks good pretty much throughout, but that's sort of at the cost of coherence in some respects. There are areas where it's not ideal in terms of knowing what is and isn't a platform, or how the platforms actually work. The Gaulish village at the very beginning of the game is quite a confusing, almost maze-like area, though you can leave it quite quickly. The rest of the game has a sort of back and forth, bringing things to people thing going on, which sort of works in the way that it opens out the world, because there's also a world map. But overall, the games, I found it a little bit repetitive. It's definitely not bad, and it's definitely interesting, which is more important than being good, obviously. But it's not something I can say is going to appeal to everyone. The level design is pretty solid. There are some interesting hidden things to find, and I don't really want to dump on it, because there are so many kind of cool ideas in there, like the way that you infiltrate the camps to collect the different parts you need to get a Roman outfit, so you can then get into another area which only Romans can enter, stuff like that. And it has a nice kind of DOS platformer feel to it, where there's tons of secrets, much like the previous game, but it's just... there's something a little bit slack about it, considering how late it came out in the Mega Drive's life. You'd think it would just be a little bit more than it is, but it's a fun game, and I'd recommend giving it a go if you are in the mood for a kind of weird game, or a little bit weird of a game. Yeah, it's okay. Power of the Gods, it's an okay game, not the best, and I was about to say not the worst. Yeah, it's not the worst. It's still better than those first two Master System games, I would say. Last game from 1995 is the Super Nintendo's Asterix and Obelix, which is mixed. It's a mixed bag. It's a pretty interesting little game with big chunky sprites, and it borrows elements from the previous Asterix games, most notably those little boxes that you break, which turn up in almost all of them on Nintendo systems. But the level design's a little bit dull compared to the original Asterix SNES game. It's very basic kind of left to right kind of stuff, and when it's not, it's just irritating and confusing. It's well animated, everyone looks great. There's a time limit again, and I found, in my experience, the time limit in this game is a bit of a killer. It's a bit brutal. And as I said before, it's no fun to lose in a platform game by running out of time. It really doesn't bring anything to the table. But it's not bad, it's alright. You can play the whole thing with 2 players, but good luck convincing someone to play you at this. It's not going to happen. This was also later ported to the Game Boy Advance as part of a game called Asterix Bash Them All, which had a new side-scrolling beat-em-up kind of game, and also a port of this and like a double pack, which is pretty good value in my opinion. And that's pretty much all of them. Thanks for watching. There's a couple more notable Asterix games. The arcade one I already mentioned. There's also Asterix XXL on the Game Boy Advance, which is a pretty phenomenal achievement for such a system, being a 3D platformer. But recently, Microids have re-released the sequel, Asterix and Obelix XXL2, for the Switch, PS4, etc., etc., and I had a good time with that. It's a pretty basic 3D platformer, but it's a fun basic 3D platformer, so if you ever see it on sale, I would recommend picking it up. Asterix and Obelix XXL3 has recently been released, but I haven't picked it up yet, and to be honest, it looks a bit dull compared to the other ones, but yeah. So, yeah, thanks for watching Franchise and Lows. I hope I'll have another episode for you soon. Stuart Jam's back soon, and Logjan's back soon, and, you know, keep it with me, and I will be sure to furnish you with very sporadic videos about the obscure things that I like. Cheers.
Baba boom, are you gonna play a tune? Have a party, be a smarty, leave your kids behind the moon. Baba boom, kinda makes you wanna dance. We're not looking for no fighting, so let's give our peace a chance.